All right.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm really excited to share this message with all of you. So we're going to go ahead and pick up where we left off last week. If you recall, I had mentioned that David and Jonathan, which was King Saul's son, had a good friendship. However, I didn't want to go into it at that point because I wanted us to focus on King Saul's jealousy of David. And so now we're going to start with 1 Samuel chapter 18, and we're going to pick up those 4 verses that I had skipped. Let's go ahead and go right into it. So verse 1 says, after David had finished talking with Saul, this was after he had defeated Goliath, he met Jonathan, which was the king's son. There was an immediate bond between them, for Jonathan loved David. And from that day on, Saul kept David with him and wouldn't let him return home. So basically, David started to live in the palace from there on. Verse 3 tells us that Jonathan made a solemn pact. And a pact is another word for a promise. So Jonathan made a promise with David because he loved him as he loved himself. Verse 4 tells us that Jonathan sealed the pact or promise by taking off his robe and giving it to David, together with his tunic, a sword, a bow, and belt. So I'd like to ask you, did you have a best friend growing up? I know many of us did. I recall seeing as I was growing up that girls, what they would do is they'd buy these necklaces and one would say best and the other necklace would say friend. And then each of them would wear it. And then sometimes they have even like a cracked heart and then they would like come together and they were matching. Another thing I remember seeing was these charm bracelets. And these charm bracelets also said best friends on it, and you could add different charms. And 2 best friends would have matching bracelets. Another thing too, just growing up with my guy friends, I remember that if we were really good friends, we'd be able to trust each other to let the other one borrow something. So you'd be like, hey man, can I borrow your shoes? And you're like, yeah, go for it. Or, hey, can I borrow the sweater? I'm gonna wear it. Yeah, and you would trust them to wear it, or even a hat. And then at some point, when they're like, hey, do you want your sweater back? If you didn't really need it or you had another one, you'd be like, hey, go ahead and keep it. So in that same way, Jonathan, when he made this promise to David that they were going to be basically best friends, they sealed that promise by an exchange where Jonathan gave him some stuff like his robe, a tunic, a sword, his bow, and a belt. So now let's move on to 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 1 through 18. We find here now that the title of this chapter is Saul Tries to Kill David. And we're going to see what part Jonathan's friendship plays into that plan. Starting in verse 1 there in this chapter. King Saul now urged his servants and even his son Jonathan to assassinate David. But Jonathan, because of his strong affection for David, told him what his father was planning. Tomorrow morning, he warned him, you must find a hiding place out in the fields. I'll ask my father to go out there with me, and I'll talk to him about you. Then I'll tell you everything I can find out. So the next morning, Jonathan spoke with his father about David, saying many good things about him. He told him, the king must not sin against his servant David. Jonathan said, he's never done anything to harm you. He's always helped you in any way he could. Have you not forgotten about the time he risked his life to kill the Philistine giant and how the Lord brought a great victory to all Israel as a result? You were certainly happy about it then. Why should you murder an innocent man like David? There's no reason for it at all. So Jonathan was trying to convince his dad that trying to kill David wasn't a good idea and that David had in fact not given him any reason to kill him. So verse 6 tells us that Saul actually listened to Jonathan and he vowed. He said, you know what? You're right. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed. So afterward, Jonathan got excited. He called David and he told him what happened. And then he brought David to Saul, and David was able to serve in the court as before. So he started to live again in the palace. Well, too bad the story doesn't end there.
Yeah.
What we find out in verse 8 is that the war broke out again after that. And David led his troops against the Philistines like he always did. And as David attacked them, he did it with such fury that all the enemies, all the Philistines ran away from him and his men. So verse 9 then tells us, but one day when Saul was sitting at home with the spear in his hand, that tormenting evil spirit that we read about last week, that was from the Lord, suddenly came upon him again. And in that very similar situation as we had learned about last week, as David was there again playing his harp, Saul grabbed that spear and he hurled his spear at David, but David was able to dodge it and he was able to get out of the way. And it says here that it left the spear stuck in the wall. He fled and escaped into the night. So Saul threw the spear again at David, for this would be time number 3. And he threw it so hard that the Bible tells us that spear was left stuck in the wall. So just probably missed David by a few inches. And so David is scared and he takes off and escapes into the night. Now we're going to see here how Michal saves David's life. Verse 11 tells us, then Saul sent troops to watch over David's house. So David had ran away. And so they knew that at some point David was going to have to come back home. So now he has his soldiers basically doing surveillance over David's house. And they were told to kill David when he came out the next morning. But Michal, you remember Michal, David's wife? She warned him. She said to David, if you don't escape tonight, you will be dead by morning. So she helped him climb out through a window and he fled and escaped. Then look what she does. She took an idol and put it in his bed. She covered it with blankets and put a cushion of goat's hair at its head. When the troops came to arrest David, she told them that he was sick and he couldn't get out of bed. But Saul sent the troops back to get David. He ordered, bring him to me in his bed so I can kill him. But when they came to carry David out, they discovered that it was only an idol in the bed with a cushion of goat's hair at its head. Verse 17, why have you betrayed me like this and let my enemy escape? Saul demanded from his daughter Michal. I had to, Michal replied. He threatened to kill me if I didn't help him. So David escaped and he went to Ramah to see Samuel. And he told him all that Saul had done to him. Then the prophet Samuel took David with him to live in a city called Naioth. 1 Samuel chapter 20. David now fled from Naioth in Ramah, and as he was fleeing, he found Jonathan. This is David speaking. What have I done? He exclaimed. What is my crime? How have I offended your father that he's so determined to kill me? That's not true, Jonathan protested. You're not going to die. He always tells me everything he's going to do, even the little things. I know my father wouldn't hide something like this from me. It just isn't so. Verse 3. Then David took an oath before Jonathan and said, look, your father knows perfectly well about our friendship. So he has said to himself, I won't tell Jonathan. Why should I hurt him? But I swear to you that I am only a step away from death. I swear by the Lord and by your own soul. So Jonathan says, well, then tell me what I can do to help you. Verse 5, David replied, tomorrow, as you know, we celebrate the new moon festival. And I've always eaten with the king on this occasion. But tomorrow, I'll hide in the field and I'll stay there until the evening of the 3rd day. So if your father asks where I am, tell him that I asked for permission to go home to Bethlehem for an annual family sacrifice. Now, if he says, fine, you will know all is well. But if he is angry and he loses his temper, then you'll know that he's actually determined to kill me. Verse 8, Show me this loyalty as my sworn friend, for we made a solemn pact, a promise before the Lord. Or kill me yourself if I have sinned against your father, but please don't betray me to him." "Never," Jonathan exclaimed. "You know that if I had the slightest notion that my father was planning to kill you, I would tell you at once." Then David asked, "How will I know then whether or not your father's angry?" So Jonathan comes up with the plan. He says, "All right, here's what we're going to do." Verse 11, "Come out to the field with me." And they went out there together. Then Jonathan tells them the plan. "I promise by the Lord, the God of Israel, that by this time tomorrow or the next day at the latest, I will talk to my father and I'll let you know at once how he feels about you. If he speaks favorably about you, then I will let you know. But if he's angry and he wants you killed, then may the Lord strike me and even kill me if I don't warn you so he can escape and live. May the Lord be with you," he says, "as he used to be with my father." "Here's the plan," Jonathan said. "Tomorrow we celebrate the new moon festival. You will be missed, as you said, when your place at the table is empty. So the day after tomorrow, toward the evening, go to the place where you hid before, and I want you to wait there by the stone pile. Then I will come out and shoot 3 arrows to the side of the stone pile, as though I were shooting at a target. Then I will send a boy to bring the arrows back. If you hear me tell him, 'They're on this side,' then you will know, as surely as the Lord lives, that all is well and that there isn't any trouble." Verse 22, "But if I tell him, 'Go farther, the arrows are still ahead of you,' then that will mean that you've got to leave immediately, for the Lord is sending you away. And may the Lord make us keep our promises to each other, for he has witnessed them." Verse 24, "So David hid himself in the field, and then the new moon festival began. And so the king sat down to eat. He sat at his usual place against the wall, with Jonathan sitting opposite of him, and then his commander Abner was sitting next to him. But David's seat, his place, was empty. Saul didn't say anything about it on the first day, for he said himself, well, maybe David did something that made him ceremonially unclean. But when David's place was empty again on the second day, Saul looks at Jonathan and he asks him, why hasn't the son of Jesse been here for the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan replied, David earnestly asked me if he could go to Bethlehem, he said. Please let me go, for we're having a family sacrifice. My brother demanded that I be there, so please let me get away to see my brothers. That's why he isn't here at the king's table. Look at King Saul's reaction here. Verse 30, Saul boiled with rage at Jonathan. You stupid son of a whore, he swore to him. Do you think I don't know that you want him to be king in your place, shaming yourself and your mother? As long as that son of Jesse is alive, you'll never be king. Now go and get him so I can kill him. Man, what a reaction. Said the Bible is boring. Verse 32. But why should he be put to death? Jonathan asked his father. What has he done? Then look, Saul grabbed that spear and he hurled it at Jonathan, intending to kill him. So at last, Jonathan realized that his father really was determined to kill David. Verse 34, Jonathan left the table in fierce anger, and he refused to eat on that second day of the festival, for he was crushed by his father's shameful behavior towards David. Verse 35, the next morning, as agreed, Jonathan went out into the field and he took the young boy with him, who was going to gather the arrows that Jonathan was going to shoot. Verse 36, start running, he told the boy, so you can find the arrows as I shoot them. So the boy ran, and Jonathan shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy had almost reached the arrow, Jonathan shouted, the arrow is still ahead of you. Hurry, hurry, don't wait. So the boy quickly gathered up the arrows and he ran back to his master. He, of course, the boy, suspected nothing. Only Jonathan and David understood that signal. Verse 40, then Jonathan gave his bow and arrows to the boy and he told him to take them back into town. Verse 41. As soon as the boy was gone, David came out from where he was hiding, near the stone pile. Then David bowed down 3 times to Jonathan with his face to the ground. And both of them were in tears. They were crying as they hugged each other, as they embraced each other, and they said goodbye, especially David. Verse 42, at last Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for we have sworn loyalty to each other in the Lord's name. The Lord is the witness of a bond that we have between us and our children forever. So then David had to leave. He left, and Jonathan returned back to the town. And that ends our reading for tonight. And so now for the discussion part. We see here that Saul is still trying to kill David. It's interesting to see that he's become even more aggressive with his plans to do so. Remember that before, Saul's strategy was to set him up several times to be killed by the Philistines. But now he's actually urging his servants and his son Jonathan to assassinate David. And this all keeps happening despite David making the right choices. Remember when King Saul hurled that spear at David twice, and then we read this chapter a third time, David never fought back. He never picked up the spear and threw it right back at him, right? He didn't even fight him. It just every time he dodged it and he took off running. David never tried to overthrow the kingdom. David knew he was going to be the rightful king. He was anointed by King Samuel. He knew he had all his officers backing him up. He knew he had all the popularity of the Israelites. Everyone liked him, and yet he never tried to take King Saul's throne from him. David also never called out Saul for lying to him when he gave away King Saul's first daughter in marriage to another man, even though he was supposed to claim her as a reward, first for killing the giant, and second, after he had done the task of killing the Philistines like King Saul had asked. It's clear here that for David, his situation is just getting worse, not better. So in this same way, you might find yourself in a difficult situation where you feel like even though you've been making all the right choices in your situation, things just aren't getting better. And so if that's the situation you find yourself, I'd like to encourage you to not give up and to continue to make the right choices, even though it doesn't feel like things are really changing for you. Don't get discouraged. Don't give up. The battle isn't over yet for you. You can keep moving forward. You see, this situation with King Saul happened because of free will. God didn't stop Saul's actions and evil plans. And I'm here to point out to you today that in today's day, free will still exists for all humanity. What does that mean? What is free will? Free will means that we all get to make our own choices, and God permits us to make those choices, whether they're good or bad. And that's why people make terrible choices of mass shootings. This is why people in power make choices to create war with each other and so many things. And yet God, it's not that he's causing it, but he permits it because we've all given the choice of free will. But amongst all that negativity and everything that David was going through, I want to point out something to you. Did you notice how God worked through the other people in David's life? Even though King Saul was chasing after him and he never did nothing to him to deserve so much hate, what about the people who were doing positive things for David? Did you notice how God used them in David's life? Let's talk about Jonathan. Jonathan told David what his father was planning to do. Remember when he said, hey, I'd like you guys to assassinate David? He warned him that King Saul was in fact trying to kill him. Then after he did that, If you recall, towards the beginning of what we had read, Jonathan went out of his way to speak to his father, and he started to say all the good things about David to him. Jonathan reminded King Saul, hey, David never did any harm to you. You know, he always helped you in any way that he could. And don't you remember that he even risked his life to kill the Philistine giant, and he won a great victory for Israel? And by doing that, Jonathan was able to convince King Saul not to kill David, although that didn't last very long, as we read. But when King Saul wanted to kill King David, someone else in his life stepped up for him and helped him. And who was that? It was Michal, his wife. And as you remember, David wasn't even supposed to marry Michal. He was supposed to marry the other sister. But yet, because David was patient and he didn't get angry, this other opportunity presented itself where David got to marry a princess who actually loved him. And in this, we get to see that how that love really ended up protecting David. You see, Michal warned David that they were coming to kill him. Then she helped him escape through the window. After that, she covered up for David's escape. Remember when she grabbed the idol and she put it in the bed and she covered it with a blanket and put goat's hair to make it look like it was him laying on that bed? She did all that because one, she loved him, and two, because she wanted to protect him and help him, even if it meant going against her father. Finally, if you recall, Jonathan ended up helping David escape one more time. Jonathan kept his promise to David that he would tell him the truth about King Saul's plans. And sure enough, he did. He was able to use, remember that sign, the signal of the young boy with his arrows. And in doing that, Jonathan was able to warn David that King Saul was in fact determined to kill him. And so David was able to escape and go far, far away before King Saul could find him. So now I'd like to ask you, who are the people that God has placed in your life to help you? Who has God been using? You see, a lot of times we get in these difficult situations where people hurt us or disappoint us, and we're so focused on that person that hurt us or let us down that we forget to look around us to see, well, who are the people in my life that are actually helping me, that do have my best interests, that do care and love me. And we get so distracted with the ones that let us down or don't want to have a relationship with us no more. And we're so focused on them instead of forgetting to see all the great people God has put in your life. So it really is about a matter of just kind of changing your perception, opening your eyes and looking around and being thankful for those people. I put some examples here too. So you might get really sick. You might get hospitalized and people are like, well, that's a terrible thing. But in that time and in that moment, God can use the doctors. He can use the nurses and all the medical staff there to help you get back to health. He can use those people to bless you and get to the point where you're able to eventually get discharged. God can even use people at school. Like you might be having a bad day with your friends or in your relationship, and yet a teacher might say something kind to you or may ask you how you're feeling or how you're doing, or it could be a counselor or even coaches. Mm-hmm. God can use friends, true friends, friends like the way Jonathan was, that are willing to go out of their way and risk it all to make sure you're okay and that you're safe. Or it could even be a family member, a parent, a mom or a dad who's always there for you. Maybe it's not your parents, maybe it's a grandma or your grandpa who stepped up and has been like a father figure, a mother figure for you. Or it could be another believer, someone from church, someone like the pastor or a leader in the church, or someone you've known for quite some time. They may not be your family, but they feel like family, because when you have a problem or you're going through something, that's who you go to. That's who you talk to about it. Now, if you're sitting there and you say, well, I don't have nobody, there's no one that I can think of. that God has put in my life to help me. If you're saying that to yourself, then I believe that it's because God wants you to realize what I'm about to say. The reason why you feel like there's nobody out there or no one who's in your life that God's using to help you is because God wants you to realize that He's the one in your life who wants to help you and be there for you. God also wants you to realize that when you feel like you're all alone, you're not, because God is always there for you. God wants you to realize that when you feel like no one cares, that's an incorrect statement, because God cares about you. And so in conclusion, to finish this off, I'd like to remind each one of you this evening that even though you might be going through a difficult time right now in your life, you can be confident that God is with you while you're going through that difficult situation. You're not alone, because God promises to never leave you. And I'm not just saying that, the Bible actually says that. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, you can read God saying, "This is my command." He tells the people of Israel, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged by your situation. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." I want you to also remember that you can be confident that God can in fact place people in your life to help you and to bring comfort to you in that difficult situation that you're going through. And sometimes God can work in your life without you even noticing it. It can be as simple as hearing this message. God's provided this message for you tonight so that He could bring you some hope and comfort in your current situation. Finally, I'd like you to know that difficult situations are just going to come and go in your life. That's life. They're going to come and then they're going to go. Just like the waves in the ocean. Have you ever gone to the beach and you look out in the ocean, the waves rise and get really high and then they crash and you see foam. And then another one rises and it crashes, and it's just constant over and over. And that's how those difficult situations may feel at times. Like they're unending, constantly rising and crashing into your life. But God will never leave you, and He will always be there for you to help you, to comfort you, to strengthen you, and yes, one day to welcome you into heaven. And so with that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you for joining us. I hope that this message finds you well. And I ask that God may bless each one of you, watch over you, and remember this message. God is in fact there for you. He has placed people in your life to help you. It's just sometimes we have what they call like tunnel vision. You're just looking at the problem. You're just focusing on the people that have hurt you and let you down, that you forget to open your eyes and look and to see all the great people that are in your life, that want to be in your life, that want to see you do well, that want the best for you. Those are the people right now we should be thanking God. Even if you're not in the best situation, you can at least be thankful that God has put those people in your life. And if for some reason you find like there's no one like that in your life, you can be grateful that God is there with you, that you're not alone, and that you're not dealing with that problem all by yourself. So may God be with you, and may God bless each one of you. Take care.